very good. We are live with our first quarter 2025 webinar for our property management clients here at Revolution Rental Management, as well as any other landlords out there interested. We are going to be talking this time about repair requirements for landlords. So to start off, we'll do some quick introductions. First, my name is Todd Orchide. I'm the CEO of Revolution Rental Management. We have been in business since 2008 in the Atlanta market, servicing landlords and residents here. We manage several hundred properties across the metro Atlanta area. You'll primarily be hearing from me today. I tend to talk a lot, but we'll also have our business development manager, Zach, is going to join in. So Zach, why don't you introduce yourself real quick?
Absolutely. My name is Zach Chapman. I've been licensed since 2016. I do a lot of stuff, and I'm perfect, and I know a lot of stuff, but mainly I do business development, sales, and I sign up new properties for Revolution to manage.
Nice. So yeah, Zach usually brings some nice real-world examples because he's talking to our owners and prospective owner clients all the time. So like I said, what we're going to be talking about today is repair requirements. So we've got some slides that we'll go through, and we'll talk a lot about this as we go through. Let me pull that presentation up, and we will start off with that. And then if you have any questions, feel free to drop those into the Q&A, and we will get to those at the end. But here to start off, just want to welcome everybody. Thank everybody for showing up here for our webinar. We do these every quarter. We try to cover things that are current, things that have been issues lately for clients or things that potential clients have told us about. So we do these every 3 months. Be sure to stay subscribed to our email list. So that way you will always get notified when we've got a webinar coming up, and we'll also send out these recordings after those webinars too. So be sure to be on our mailing list. And of course, we always want to thank all of our current clients, not just prospective owners. We're here to provide good information to our existing clients. Education of investors is one of our core values. So that's a big part of what we do here at Revolution. So on the agenda today, so we mentioned we're talking about repair requirements, but what we're really going to dive into is first the warranty of habitability and repair, what that means, some new Georgia rental requirements. This is going to focus on Georgia since that's where we're doing business. But a lot of what we talk about today could apply to just about anywhere. We'll talk about home warranties, the importance of maintenance for resident retention, what you should plan on for annual maintenance expenditures, and then we'll talk a little bit about what is the tenant responsibilities when it comes to maintenance. So let's start off with the big one, which is the warranty of habitability and repair. So that sounds very complicated. It's a legalese. But what it really basically means is it's just a legal concept that landlords are required to keep the property habitable and to repair anything that breaks. That's really what that legal concept means. So under Georgia code, and I'm sorry I misspelled Georgia, I always do these presentations and I realize after the fact when I'm presenting that I misspelled something no matter how many times I proofread them. So sorry about that, but that's supposed to say Georgia code section 44713. is what actually codifies this in Georgia. So that's a direct quote. It says the landlord must keep the premises in repair and is liable for all substantial improvements placed upon the premises by his consent. So what does that really mean in a, just plain language version of that? What it really means is if it's at the house, you got to make sure it's working. That's really what it bottom line comes down to. So if you've got a dishwasher at the house, you can't tell the tenant, I'm not going to fix that just because, oh, it's a dishwasher, you can wash your dishes by hand. The way the law is written, that's an improvement on the premises that you put there, so you're required to fix it, is basically what that legalese all means. So it's very important to note this is not just about a property being unlivable or there being a safety issue. When it comes to the warranty of habitability and repair, there's those two items there. There's habitability, so that's the safety portion of it, but there's also repair. If something breaks, you've got to fix it. That's just part of being a landlord. So that's the law in Georgia. It also happens to be the law in every other state in the union except for Arkansas. So if you happen to be in Arkansas, you are very lucky as a landlord. It has the most landlord friendly rules in the nation. But the way it works there is you only have a responsibility to repair if the lease specifically says you do, or if a judge comes along later and tells you to. That's about the only time. So, but for where we do business, this is basically just a requirement. You got to fix it if it breaks. So always keep that in mind. Zach.
Yeah, I did actually have a quick question on that, and I don't normally have questions, but the way that's worded, so technically, if on the in a one-off scenario where the tenant wants to do something and the owner approves and consents to it, technically the owner has to maintain that improvement because he consented to the installation or whatever that may be.
Correct. That's absolutely right. So, if the owner, for example, says, yeah, it's okay for you to install a deck in the back of the house. Yeah, but guess what? Once that deck is there, you're going to have to maintain that from that point forward. So yeah, definitely. If you consented to it being there, it's your responsibility at that point. So always keep that in mind.
I did not know that, but now I do.
So there we go. Common items that are at question on this. I wanted to cover each of these because these are where we find that we get the most objections from landlords to these sorts of things is, why do I have to fix that? It seems like it shouldn't be my responsibility. So we wanted to cover these. The first big one is appliances. So, for the longest time here at Revolution, we actually had it in our leases that said owners are not required to fix appliances that break. I mean, they were required to fix like the stove or the dishwasher if it was installed, but we always had it in our lease. Hey, if we put a refrigerator or a washer and dryer or a water softener or any of that kind of stuff in the house, these aren't necessary for the house. So the landlord says he's not going to fix them if they break. We had that in our leases for a long time. And we got slapped down in court because of that. So we went, I think it was DeKalb County, if I remember right. We went into court. It was over a refrigerator, I believe, or it might have been a clothes washer. It was one of those two. I can't remember for sure. And we pointed this out to the judge. We said, oh, it's okay. We don't have to fix it. It's in the lease. And the judge's response to our attorney, so it wasn't even us, we have attorneys for all this. He told our attorney, don't you ever come into my courtroom again with that provision in your lease. So, his guidance to our attorney was, if it's in the house, you got to fix it. So if you leave a refrigerator there, you don't have to. There's no requirement in Georgia law for you to provide a refrigerator to a tenant. But if you do, you've got to fix it if it breaks. It's not something you can put a provision into your lease because the way the judge looked at it was your lease provision is trying to invalidate something that's in the law, and you can't do that. The law says you have to fix it, so that's what you have to do. So keep that in mind. Appliances, if you leave them there, you got to fix them. Fireplaces are another big one of these, and we've seen a number of these that I'm sure Zach remembers recently where either the owner just doesn't want tenants to use the fireplace, or maybe they just haven't cleaned it in 10 years. So they just put a sign there that says don't use fireplace. You can't really do that. If there's a fireplace in the house, it's got to work. Or alternatively, you have to permanently seal off that fireplace so that it's basically no longer an improvement to the house. If you completely cover it up, you put a cap over it, all that stuff is done, then you're in the clear as long as that was done before the tenant leased the house. But if it's there, you can't just put a sign there that says can't use it. It's not like an Airbnb, so keep that in mind. Yeah, Zach.
Two things. First, the refrigerator. I know you mentioned that technically, if it's not there, you don't have to maintain it. Side note, I don't like signing up properties without refrigerators. They take forever to rent. It is, consider it a requirement. I mean, it's going to look bad anyways in the marketing photos with a big blank there where the fridge is supposed to be. If you have to, go to used appliance place, get one for a few $100 and install it. And, if the tenant wants something nicer, they could do that. But anyways, on the fireplace requirements, I support this completely. Fireplaces are no joke. You want to know it's working before you move someone in. If that flue is clogged up and they start a fire in the wintertime, it'll be 10 minutes before that entire room is filled with smoke, and it's dangerous. And it could, if it's not working properly, it could start a fire, which is truly, I use worst case scenario that verbiage a lot, but that is truly worst case scenario if you have a mishap with the fireplace. But that's about it.
Yeah, good feedback there. Um, and yeah, I would actually reiterate that. I mean, there are some tenants who come with refrigerators, but especially when we look at lower priced rentals, and when I say lower priced, I mean anything under like $2,000, $2,500.
Mhm.
A lot of tenants don't have their own because they're coming from multifamily. So they're used to having a refrigerator at their last apartment, so they don't own one, so they need one. So the only choices are either they rent a place that has it, or they're going to have to go out and buy one. So they're thinking, well, there's two places to rent here. I can either rent the one that already has the refrigerator, or I'm going to have to pay $800 for a refrigerator. So they're going to rent the house that's already got it. So
Washer and dryer is optional. I would say refrigerator is required. I would like to.
yeah, it's a good idea. It's a good idea for sure. Okay, so working down the list, next is garage door openers. So this comes up as a question because people just kind of think, all right, well, I can just disconnect the garage door opener if it's not working. You just pull the little lever, they can open and close the garage door the old-fashioned way. Problem is, if the property has a garage door opener, the tenant has an expectation it's going to work because they're touring the house, they're seeing the garage door opener. So, from an advertising perspective and everything else, it is a reasonable belief for the tenant to say, all right, I see a garage door opener. I assume it works. They're obviously not going to test it while they're touring the house. So you basically have to make sure that's working. If you don't want to have a garage door opener, you got to remove it before you list the property for rent. But the problem there is people don't want to rent a house that has a garage without a garage door opener. So not an advisable thing to do. They ain't that expensive. It's better to just fix it, and even replace. I mean, a garage door opener is a couple $100. This isn't something where you want to try to save money. So,
That's
uh,
a that's a deal breaker. I would not like to get out of my car and open up the garage door and drive my car in and do that every day and then get out and close it and have to do the same thing when you go to work the next morning. It is unreasonable.
absolutely. And I used to do that. My first house when I was 21 years old up in Ohio, I had a detached garage. And, if you've ever lived in Ohio, it gets really, really cold in northern Ohio. And I was having to get out and open that garage door myself each day. It's not fun. So yeah, you don't want to do that unless you absolutely have to. So definitely fix those. The next item I'll point out is air conditioning. So a lot of people, and we'll talk about this in a minute in a lot more detail because it's some new legislation, but just real quick, don't assume that you don't have to fix air conditioning. Don't think it's optional. We'll cover why later, but air conditioning is a mandatory repair item, so keep that in mind. The other one that comes up really often is garbage disposals. So a lot of people think, oh, it's just a garbage disposal. It's not that big of a deal, but it is an amenity in the house. The tenant does know that it's there, so if it breaks, you do have to fix it. So it's not something that you can just, if it breaks, go in and tear it out of the house and say, okay, now it doesn't have a garbage disposal. If it was there when the tenant moved in, they've got an expectation. And the other thing I would say on that is this is sort of like a refrigerator. People want to have them, So I mean, theoretically, you could remove it before you list the property for rent, and then you don't have a liability there to get it fixed. But the problem is, particularly on nicer houses, if you're renting a house in Peachtree City, Georgia, and it doesn't have a garbage disposal, that's just honestly, that's just kind of low rent, for lack of a better term. So you want to make sure you have those sort of basic amenities in the house. So it's better it's not a very expensive thing. Just fix it, make the tenant's life easier, and it makes it easier for you to rent the property and keep the tenants happy. Exterior items sometimes come up. People say, oh, I don't need to fix it because it's outside. It's not in the living space. And that is not the case. There is still an obligation to fix something as long as it's not just like a minor cosmetic thing. If you have a fence at the house, this is a perfect example, and a tree falls on the fence, you can't just say, I'm not going to fix the fence. That's a major amenity of the house. It's got to be repaired. It doesn't matter that it's outside. That doesn't change the calculus at all. So you still have to get that fixed. And the same thing is true on separate buildings. So if you've got like a shed in the backyard or, a barn, something like that, if it's a bigger house, those things have to be in good condition also. So, it doesn't necessarily have to be beautiful and freshly painted and all of that, but if the door doesn't work, that's a problem. If it's got broken floorboards and you can step through them and hurt yourself, that's a problem. So you got to make sure that those things are taken care of. You're not exempted from it just because it's a shed in the backyard. That's still something that you've got to get taken care of. Yes, Zach.
Quick, on garbage disposals, I would like to say that these are prone to needing repairs. It's just the way of life. If you own it and you live there, you're probably gonna take, you're gonna make sure not to put any bones down there. This will happen every now and then with tenants. It just happens. I've seen dental floss, the dental sticks, and I've seen all sorts of stuff, that the plumber or the vendor will pull out of the drain. But if that happens and it's the tenant's fault, we charge that back to the tenant, don't we?
Oh, definitely. Yeah,
That's important.
absolutely. And that's something we will cover later is what tenants are responsible for. So I mean that's definitely something. But yeah, those things do happen. They pop up. So just keep those in mind and plan for them. Last couple items that I would say come up. These don't come up as often, but these are things that do come up. One is built-in space heaters or air conditioners. So we've seen these where houses, particularly some of the older houses, duplexes, quads, those sorts of things, have like a built-in window furnace or built-in window air conditioner and furnace. And it's just not working. It's been sitting there for years. The owner hasn't done anything with it. That, if it's installed in the house, has to be working. So you can't just leave that there and just put a placard on it that says not working. If it's there, you got to fix it. And I'll say this isn't just a legal requirement. This is something you want to make sure for the safety of your house, because we had one of these in a property years ago that caught on fire and burned the whole house down. So you want to be careful with this. Don't just assume that, oh, we put a big note on it that says do not use. People don't read. And people, even when they do read, people will ignore things and they'll say, oh, I'm sure it's not a big deal. And they'll try to use it anyway. And then that it's all shorted out and it's going to catch on fire. They don't know that. So they're just going to use it. So make sure if it's there, it works. And if you don't want to get it working, remove it. But in a minute, we're going to talk about the requirement for AC. So you're not going to be able to remove most of these. The last item is mold and mildew. So I will say that people overuse the term mold, and that's probably because local news stations, this is like a whole cottage industry, is talking about mold in properties on evening news stations. But there are real cases of mold, and we've run into these over the years. Most of what we see is mildew. It's not mold. It's just, a little bit of dampness. You get a little bit of mildew here and there because someone doesn't turn on their vent fan when they're using the shower. But you do want to double check and make sure that you don't have any mold issues in the house, because those can be big problems. And if a tenant brings it to your attention and there's mold there and you don't fix it, there can be serious legal consequences to that. So you got to make sure you take care of these, you investigate it if there's any sort of question on that. Any final thoughts on the list here, Zach, before we move on?
Oh, I could speak for an hour if you let me. The mold and mildew stuff, the M word. I've seen that a lot, and I know a lot of times property management companies will, if they're confident, they know it's mildew, they know it's not dangerous, will make the tenant pay for the air quality test if it comes back. If they send a licensed mold guy and it comes back negative and it was just a bunch of hubbub, they'll make the tenant pay for it. Also, I have seen tenants try and throw that word around a lot. Usually, not necessarily with Revolution, but when rent's due on the first, I'm gonna throw that word around a little bit. It's the first. I'm gonna keep them on their toes. I've seen property management companies allow them an exit from their lease. If you don't want to take the chance, you're more than welcome to move. And usually They are just like, okay, never mind. I was just kidding. I don't want to move. That's my 2 cents on that. Um, yeah, and then exterior items. I was thinking about that one too. You said it though. It's not living area. It doesn't need to look good if it's a shed, but it can't be falling apart. If it falls on someone, we're all gonna get sued. We need to make sure it is okay.
Excellent. Excellent.
Thank you.
All right, so let's talk about what I hinted at earlier, which is that new Georgia law about air conditioning. So we've covered this in a prior webinar, I think last fall, but I wanted to emphasize this here. Last year, the Georgia State Legislature ratified something that they called the Safe at Home Act, which, like a lot of these bills, is a little bit of a misnomer because it covered a lot of stuff that had nothing whatsoever to do with safety. But that's what they called it, and it was signed by the governor last spring, I believe it was. And what that did was it further clarified what was covered by the warranty of repair. So, like I said, we had a lot of people who thought they didn't have to provide air conditioning. Well, the law makes clear now that that is not optional. Air conditioning is absolutely mandatory for every single rental property. Now, I know that might seem crazy. Maybe you've lived in the state of Georgia for many, many years and you didn't have air conditioning for a long time and you don't understand why everybody thinks they are entitled to air conditioning. I get it. I've owned houses that didn't have air conditioning, but now in the state of Georgia, it is not something that you're able to get by with not providing. So it is an absolute mandatory requirement. Every rental property has to have both heating and air conditioning. So that must be there. It must be working. So even if your property that you have doesn't have central air, you're still required to provide air conditioning in some manner. So you're going to have to do window air conditioners, or you'll have to install a central air system. That's what I recommend, just because that's a big improvement to the house. It's going to make it a lot more valuable. It's the 21st century now. So a lot of these houses built in the 50s, 60s, 70s that didn't have air conditioning, it makes sense to just go ahead and upgrade them, especially now that this law is in place. So I recommend just installing central HVAC. But if you can't afford that, if you're not able to do that, the bare minimum you're going to have to provide window air conditioning units. So make sure you do that. The same does hold true for heating. That's kind of a less important issue because we don't see many houses that don't have a furnace installed. They usually at least have central heat. But if by some chance you have a property that doesn't have central heat, you got to provide heat in some way. And there are window systems that will do both, by the way. They're called reverse cycle window air conditioners. They'll do both heating and air conditioning. So if you need to do that, that's an option. We've done that on, I think, at least one house. So keep that in mind. But last item here is old Freon is now an issue. I'm going to let Zach handle this because he actually brought this up to me. I didn't think about this. Zach, can you cover what the issue is here with how there's some new requirements on Freon for air conditioners?
I can, but I can't get technical. I don't understand the codes and the actual the requirements. But what I can tell you is that last year, maybe the year before, I was trying to sell a house in East Atlanta, super nice townhome. We were under contract and go in our inspection period, and the HVAC unit was older. It worked fine, and no problems with it. But the inspection company, someone went to service it, and when they got to the AC unit, it's an older unit, and they couldn't top it off with Freon. Something about you can't put new Freon in the old tanks. It's illegal. So I lost a sale because of that, because it now changed from, instead of just servicing the AC unit, the seller was required to replace it completely. And she just said no. And I understand it works fine, no problem with the tenants. But yeah, that is a big requirement. And a lot of people don't know about it. So if you're investing, if you're buying an old property with an old unit, may want to brush up on the requirements.
Yeah, good, very good point for people to remember. This is something that comes up, it seems every few decades, because I remember back in the 90s when I was a teenager, I worked at car dealerships. And in the old, if you go way back to like the 70s and 80s, cars used what's called R12 refrigerant, which is a really old type of Freon. And then I can't remember exactly when the rule changed, but sometime around the 80s or early 90s, they changed the rule, and now you have to have R134 refrigerant, which is a new kind, which is supposedly better for the environment. It doesn't leak as much, that sort of thing. So we had cars coming in constantly that we had to change, that we had conversion kits that had to be done. It's basically the same kind of situation here. It's different Freon names than R12 and R134, but it's the same concept. All these systems are using older types of Freon that are now no longer being used. So now somebody goes out to service that system. Let's say they go out, and the reason it's not air conditioning very well is that the Freon's low. Well, they can't put the old Freon type anymore. So there's two options. It either doesn't work, which can't happen with a rental property, or you got to switch it over to the new type of refrigerant system. So keep that in mind. If you've got a really old system, and some of these systems can last 25 years, it's rare, but it does happen, you might run into that kind of situation. So just keep that in mind, that might be coming up for you if you've got an older system. Zach?
Last point. I know we're limited on time, but I feel strongly about this. As a former tenant and a longtime resident of Georgia, it gets hot in the summertime. And most of us who have lived here our entire lives, it's hot, most of the year. So when winter rolls around, we don't know, we can't handle it. So with Georgians, Atlantans, ATLians, we take our heat and air very seriously. We're not playing around when it comes to AC in the summertime and heat in the wintertime. We don't know what to do without it. So just my 2 cents on that.
Nice. All right, moving on to home warranties. So we wanted to cover this because it's not something that comes up with a lot of our clients, but we do have a small subset of new clients onboarded who have home warranties for their property. So we wanted to cover this for people who are out there. Maybe you're thinking about buying your first investment property, or maybe you've had properties for a while and you're wondering whether a home warranty is a good idea. We always advise people, whether you're working with us or not, home warranties are just a terrible idea for a rental property. They don't work well. And the reason for that is warranty companies tend to take a long time to get work done. So number one, it takes forever to even get them to dispatch a vendor. So, you could be on the phone for 2 hours with the warranty company trying just to get them to dispatch somebody. But then sometimes it takes days or even weeks for that vendor to actually go out to the house. That doesn't work when you've got tenants. Number one, because of the warranty of repair, but number two, because you're trying to make this tenant happy. You want them to pay rent. You want them to renew their lease. They aren't going to be happy if it takes a long time to get something fixed. So that's a big problem. Another big problem is these warranties, it's just like your health insurance. Think about it that way. There are a million different exclusions for things that your health insurance doesn't cover. A home warranty is exactly the same way. There's a bunch of fine print in that home warranty agreement that says these are all the things we don't cover. And a whole lot of the time, the stuff that you need to get fixed is not covered. So perfect example, I've been doing this now for, we've been in business since 2008. I've been running the company most of that time. I have literally never seen a home warranty company replace an HVAC system at no cost. Never seen it happen. We filed a lot of claims for it. I'll tell you that. We filed a lot of claims, but every single time the home warranty company comes back and they say, okay, we'll approve replacement of that HVAC system. However, it's a really old system and there's all of these things that aren't up to code. So we'll replace your HVAC system, but then we're going to charge you $4,000 to do all of these upgrades that we're requiring you to do to bring it up to current code. Because buried in that warranty paperwork, it says, even if the city doesn't require you to bring it up to code, even if you're grandfathered in, the warranty company is requiring you to bring it up to code. So we see that all the time. There's also just exclusions for certain items. So for example, like zone dampers on HVAC systems are usually not included. So if you've got a house with one HVAC system and 3 different zones on it, that ain't going to be covered. That's just, so there's all of these little things. So keep that in mind. Just understand that home warranties are a great idea if you're buying a house and the seller is providing it as an incentive, so they're paying for the warranty. By all means, demand that when you're buying a house. Get it. It's a freebie to you. The seller's paying for it. that's fantastic. But as a landlord, or even for your own house that you live in after the seller's warranty wears out, don't pay for a warranty again. It just doesn't make financial sense for you. It just never does. Zach, any thoughts on that? Because I know you've handled a lot of warranty claims in your day.
Absolutely. Yeah, we can't afford to wait 3, 4 weeks on a home warranty to facilitate and assess a HVAC replacement or repair. That is a really good way to end up on the news. Uh, we don't want to do that. You don't want us to do that. So that's just to, and you, so all the money you pay them, uh, I always recommend just to put it on the side. Get yourself a little maintenance fund going. 150, $100 a month, whatever it is. Over time, uh, you know, it's you won't be paying a home warranty company for nothing. So let me just put it like that.
Yep, I like it, and we will actually cover something like that a little bit later. Okay, let's talk HOA and code compliance. So far we've been talking about state law, but state law isn't the only thing that applies here. We also have to worry about if your property is in a neighborhood that has an HOA, we have to worry about that. And then in pretty much every case, there are also city or county codes or ordinances that you have to deal with. So the state obviously has their minimum standards for what they expect. But then let's say you've got a house in Peachtree City, because that's very close to our office. Peachtree City is maniacal about making sure the way their properties look throughout the community, because it's a centrally planned community, it's a master planned community. They don't have HOAs in Peachtree City. Instead, they just have the city code enforcement, and they drive around and they enforce all of it. So a lot of things that you would not be required to do under state law as a landlord, you might be required to do by the HOA or by a city or county code. So perfect examples of these things would be pressure washing. So if you've got green growth on the side of your house, a lot of times the HOA or the city is going to make you clean that off, even though state doesn't care. They don't consider that a habitability issue. Nothing's broken that you have to fix, but the HOA is going to tell you to do it anyway. We get a lot of HOA violations for soffits and fascias on the front of your house, up in those dormers and those areas. They start to rot. They start to get bad, especially if they were made with wood, like back in the 70s and 80s. They start to get bad, and the HOA will violate you on those, and they'll say you have to replace them. Doors and windows, same way. If the paint starts peeling off the door, those sorts of things, they're going to hit you with a violation. They're going to require you to fix that. Sometimes even paint. If you get to a point where you've had the same paint on that house for 30 years and it's starting to peel off and look nasty, or it's just super faded, they might tell you you've got to get that house repainted. And you look at it as a landlord and you're saying, I don't want to spend thousands upon thousands of dollars to repaint this. It's not a habitability issue, but you got no choice because you've got a house that's got neighborhood covenants. You got to comply with those. Mailboxes are another big one. For some reason, these have problems all the time. I don't know if it's still like when I was a kid and kids run around and hit them with baseball bats. I don't know if that's still a thing with kids playing video games, but I mean, sometimes that might be the case. Sometimes they just wear out. But whatever the case may be, HOAs love to issue violations on mailboxes. And the big one we always see from both HOAs and city code inspectors is lawn care. Because there is nothing that the state cares about they don't care if your lawn is a foot tall. Doesn't matter to the state, but the city cares in a lot of cases, and you can bet that the HOA will care. They're not going to wait till it gets to a foot tall. They're going to say when it's 3 inches tall, we want that cut. So all of these things are requirements, even though they're not in the state requirements. Anything to add to that, Zach?
Yes. HOAs will also really go after you, not just for overgrown grass, but for slight weeds growing near the sidewalk. Also, if your lawn gets a lot of sun and that nice grass burns up in patches, they will make you and enforce fixing it. Even if it's fall, they will require you to go out and buy a bunch of sod or Bermuda, whatever the neighborhood requires, and lay it down. And they don't really care if it's wintertime either. If it's not the season to grow grass, they will expect you to figure it out. The really high-end neighborhood, the HOAs, they're not playing around when it comes to landscaping. And then just a friendly reminder, most of this, all this stuff is exterior. Friendly reminder to trim away the bushes and the vegetation uh, growing against the house. And that's an easy one. It's a big one. It'll save stuff from vines and, growing into the house. We don't want that. So easy fix.
Yep. And Zach said something there that I think is really important, which is they just expect you to figure it out. That's a good way to, because when that HOA might, depending if you're in a really nice HOA, maybe they'll care about your sob story if you don't have the money to pay to do something, but probably not. And I can guarantee you 110% the city or the county, they don't care about your sob story at all. So if you come to them and tell them, hey, it's the economy's bad. I lost my job. I'm a landlord with this property. I don't have the money to do that. The city's answer is just going to be, I don't care. Figure it out. Take a loan, borrow money from family, do whatever you got to do. All we're telling you is you have to do this by this date, or we're going to issue you more fines. And believe it or not, you can end up in jail over a city code violation. So, and we have actually seen landlords end up in jail over this. And they bail out really quickly, and then they have to go and pay a big fine, but they end up with an arrest record because of that. So these are serious things. And when Zach says they just tell you to figure it out, that's exactly what they expect you to do. There's not going to be any leniency on it. So you got to make sure you take care of these things.
I I interacted with a guy. He was a client. He inherited a home, and literally the same stuff. HOA, the grass was burnt up, but he never purchased it. He was left the home, so he inherited all the problems that came with it.
Oh man, that's brutal. All right, resident retention. This kind of goes back to what we were talking about briefly earlier, but I wanted to cover this in depth because there's nothing more important to a landlord than keeping the tenant you have. Vacancy cost is the biggest killer for profitability on a rental property. So keeping the tenant in the property matters more than just about anything. So when we look at survey results, what we find is maintenance and repairs is the number one controllable reason for why a tenant doesn't renew their lease. Everybody has an idea in their head that it's all about rent increases. Oh, tenants leave when you raise the rent. That actually is single-digit percentage of lease non-renewals. It's very uncommon. And the reason for that is it costs a lot more money to move than it does to just eat the rent increase. So rent increases rarely result in non-renewals. Maintenance not getting done, though, not fixing something, that makes a tenant really mad because that's the one real advantage they have to being a renter as opposed to an owner. They don't have to worry about those things. So when they're renting a property and that stuff isn't getting taken care of, they're looking at it and saying, this is the one benefit I'm supposed to have of not owning my own house, and I'm not even getting it. So they're going to bounce and go to somewhere else where they can get those problems resolved. So you want to make sure this is taken care of because it prevents your turnover. The data that we get, so we use some software, that's very popular software in the industry that tracks approval ratings from tenants when it comes to repairs, and it tracks how long it takes to get repairs done. So we got millions upon millions of units in this software, so we're able to pull data from it and see what makes tenants happy, what are those timelines where tenants are actually happy with how quick the repair is done. So what we find is if a regular repair takes more than 5 days, so when I say regular repair, I'm talking about like the garbage disposal is broken or the garage door opener isn't working. These things that aren't major issues, but they're annoyances. It's things that they don't like. They expect those to be fixed within 5 days. Now, when it comes to major items, and when we talk about that, we're usually talking about HVAC, so heating and air conditioning, plumbing, and electrical. So clogged pipes, lights are out, any of that kind of stuff. They expect that to be done in less than 3 days. And if it's not, we can watch it on the chart. The tenant satisfaction just drops off a cliff after those timelines. So everything needs to be done. The whole goal needs to be repairs need to be done in that amount of time. So waiting around for multiple quotes, so maybe you can save a few dollars. usually a really bad strategy. It usually ends up costing you more money in the long run. So let's say you have to replace a water heater. That's one of those items the tenant wants done in 3 days. In fact, that's kind of one of the most important repairs. They want that done immediately because they can't take a hot shower. They can't get their dishes done. They want that done quick. So if you send a vendor out and they quote you $1,500, let's say, to replace the water heater, and you say, that seems a little high. Let's send 2 other vendors out and check to see what their price is. And they come back, oh, it's $1,200 for this vendor and $1,600 for this other vendor. So you go with the $1,200 one. The problem is it took you a week to get all these quotes back because you sent the original vendor, then you sent 2 more. You got to wait for all of them to prepare quotes. So now this tenant's been without hot water for a week. They're really, really mad at you. So they're already deciding 6 months in advance, I am not renewing my lease with this landlord. So now what you've done is, you saved $300. You saved a whole $300 on that water heater replacement. Seems like a big deal, $1,500 to $1,200, but guess what? You cost yourself thousands of dollars because now the property's going to be vacant for 2 months, finding a new tenant because they don't want to renew. You got to pay a leasing fee to a realtor or to your property manager to find that new tenant. You're probably going to have repair expenses in between to do paint and cleaning and all that kind of stuff. So by the time this is all said and done, you save $300 on your water heater replacement and you've lost $7,000 in vacancy cost because of it. So that's why I say bottom line here, speed is more important than anything else. It's more important than saving a few dollars. It's more important than, just trying to avoid repairs to push them off into the future so that you can get some sort of advantage out. It's just the only thing that matters is speed on this. That's what makes the tenants happy, which is what's important for your long-term profitability. Zach, you have anything to add to that?
Yes, to tie this into the last slide. Now imagine everything Todd said, and then imagine now you have all the red tape of working with a home warranty company. On top of that, it's just it's another week or two. And as a former tenant, I rented for several years. I liked it. It was cool, but I'm very clean. I clean the tar out of my apartment. Vacuum every day. That's just me. I like to I work from home, like to live in a clean place. If there was something wrong when I was doing my cleaning rounds and, maintaining my area, it just annoyed me. Just absolutely. And as I know other residents are like this, other tenants who, the good ones who pay rent on time and keep the place clean and maintain it. If something breaks, if it's cosmetic, even if it's cosmetic, if it's I had a hole formed in one of the baseboards from something from the outside, and I cleaned my whole place, and there was just a freaking apple-sized hole in my baseboard, and it was an eyesore. And yeah, I mean, they fixed it quickly, but still, I was uh, I was considering, I'm just gonna move. Like I don't want to. That's just one example, but same story. Every time something breaks, that is a huge benefit of being a renter. I don't want to wait, a month for you guys to come fix this baseboard. It's an eyesore. That's my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, I mean, a perfect example. My wife and I, Abby, we used to move. We used to live both here and in Chicago. We would go back and forth. So up in Chicago, we had an apartment, and we had asked them to recalk the bathtub because it was nasty. It just had all this mildew. It was black. It was just disgusting. And when it was renewal time, we just said, we'd really like you to fix it. And they refused to do it.
See you later.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's just like, all right, go find another apartment, especially with an apartment. Deposits are really low and everything. It's really easy for us. So, that would have cost that apartment complex, I don't know, $100 in materials and labor to do that. And instead they got turnover. So, it's just not worth it. It makes much more sense as a landlord to just do what you can to make the tenant happy within reason. Now let's talk about expectations of what you should be expecting to pay when it comes for repairs, because all too often landlords don't have a general idea of what this stuff is going to cost and what they should plan for. So I wanted to go over this so everybody is kind of able to put a budget together for what they can expect for maintenance and repairs so this stuff doesn't catch you by surprise. So first, let's talk about definitions of 2 different things, because there's 2 elements of this. The first is something that we call repairs, which is pretty simple. Just routine repairs to the property, keep it habitable, repair things that break. The other thing, though, that a lot of people fail to take into account, though, is what's called CapEx or capital expenditures. That is basically major expenditures for big systems or renovations, upgrades, any of that kind of stuff. So if you think about examples of this, it would be things like your roof or replacing the windows in the house or replacing an HVAC system. All of those things fall under CapEx, which means they're taxed differently. You usually depreciate them over a long period of time. Whereas repairs, if I fix a door, I just take a deduction for that in the year I repaired it. It's just considered a repair. So everything's kind of broken into these two categories. So when we look at these two different categories of things we have to prepare for, I kind of break this out into houses that are newer, which I kind of define as within the last 10 years or so. If the house has been built in the last decade, we'll consider that a newer house. And anything older, we'll consider that an older house for this purpose. So if you've got a home that's newer in the last 10 years, these numbers have gone up a little bit in recent years because of inflation. So we used to tell people you can probably get by with a total of 8% if you had a newer house. Well, now we've bumped that up to about 10% now. So we say plan on about 7% of your rent income going towards repairs and plan on about 3% of it going to CapEx. Because it's a really new house, we're probably not going to have to replace this roof for 20 years. We've got time here. So we've got less that we need to worry about there. But that's still a total of about 10% of your rent income that you need to plan on setting aside to cover these two categories. Now, if you've got an older house, those numbers go up. So the numbers I'm giving you here are older house going back maybe to the 80s and 90s. You want to plan on about 10% of your rent income going into repairs and about another 5% going to CapEx. Now, I haven't included here much older houses. Now, if you've got houses that were built 30s, 40s, 50s, a lot of these houses need a lot of care. They've got really old systems. Some of them have lead pipes. Most of them have lead paint that you have to worry about, which makes repairs more expensive. So those can be even higher. So you'll see some people in the industry say, if you buy a house that was built 50s or earlier, you might want to set aside a quarter of your rent to cover repairs on those and in CapEx. So basically, the older the house is, the more you need to scale these up. But these figures here kind of cover 90% of the properties we see in the suburbs of Georgia. So this kind of helps you to figure this out. Now, what I will say on this is these are long-term averages. So when I tell you set aside 10% of your rent for a newer house, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's all it's going to cost you in a single year. These are amortized out over long periods of time. So the roof, when you replace it, is going to cost you $15,000, $20,000 at that time. But if we space it out over the 25 years that roof lasted, it comes out to a less amount per month. So this is just kind of letting you set aside a certain amount of money per month to kind of plan for this. But just remember, when the actual HVAC system needs to be replaced, it's $7,000 all in one lump sum. So if you're that really unlucky landlord who just bought the 20-year-old house and it's got its original HVAC system in it, you might have to replace it within that first few months that you bought it. So just keep that in mind. Zach, anything to add to that?
Not really. Well, if you, I believe we went over some of this in our last webinar. So if anyone's listening, if they're a subscriber, if they heard the last one, we talked about it. But yeah, Todd said it. Inflation, cost of everything has gone up. Rents have come down a little bit. This was my point last quarter. Rents have come down a little bit. It's been slow. It's getting better. The weather's getting nicer. July is going to be awesome. But yeah, everything's slowed down a little bit. But the prices of everything has gone up. So I would say 15% is accurate. I'd also say that several years ago, that had been really high. But it is just the way things are going right now. Paint's expensive. And all this ties into, one of the major points of our webinar, which is preventive maintenance. Just make sure, just take care of it. Keep your tenants happy. Make sure it doesn't break. And if it does break, have some money on the side to take care of it.
Nice.
And don't use a home warranty company.
Yeah, always a good reminder. Okay, so kind of a different topic somewhat, but this is still important to cover, and that's rent-ready repairs. So when it comes to what you need to do to get a property ready before a tenant moves in, you want to have sort of some minimum rent-ready conditions you're taking care of there. So you're going to want to make sure the property is either freshly painted or the paint is in good condition. You're going to want to make sure any sort of drywall, nicks, any of that kind of stuff, they're filled in, they're repaired. You want to clean the carpet. You want the house to be cleaned. You want blinds on the windows. We have a list on our website. I recommend going and taking a look at it. It's too much to put on a slide, but I recommend going to our owner frequently asked questions on our website, and there's a full list there of what we consider minimum standards for a rental property. Go and take a look at that. But one of the big things I'll highlight from it is you'll notice one of the things on that list says every component must work as designed. So if there's something installed at the house, make sure it's working, because you're just required to do that as a landlord. That's the requirement. So make sure you do that. You should also always change your locks between tenants every single time, no exceptions, and always mow the lawn in between tenants, because people will literally not rent a house just because the lawn isn't well cared for. They don't think about the fact that they're going to move in and they're going to mow the lawn, and it doesn't really matter. All they care about is they look at the house and they say, the landlord hasn't mowed this yard. That tells me all I need to know. I'm going to go and rent somewhere else. So these seem like little things, but when that property is vacant and you're trying to get a tenant, you want to take care of this stuff. Zach, anything to add to that?
Oh, no. You said it. I mean, we take it seriously. We actually it wasn't me, it was another agent on board another property without blinds this week. And I always thought that it was blinds on the front were mandatory. Have to have blinds on the front. Blinds on the back were optional. But I do support blinds on the whole of the house, because you just don't want people looking in on you. Locks are important. It's a huge liability. Absolute disaster if your old tenant walks in on your new tenant. Yeah, just unmitigated, just change the locks. $100, locksmith, rekey. Uh, that's about it. And we want it to look good. When we're marketing and trying to place a tenant, we want it to look good. We want it to smell good. Light bulbs go a long way. Cleaning goes a long way. Um, that's about it. I think you said it.
All right, so some optional repairs you can consider. These are things you don't have to do, but things you might want to think about as a landlord to try to get the best tenants and the best price out of your property. And the main point I can tell you here is just remember that curb appeal still matters. Just because it's a rental doesn't mean that curb appeal isn't a thing. It is. It may not be as big of a deal as it is for someone buying your house, but renters still care. So you want to make sure if the outside's dirty, pressure wash it. Take care of that. If the house hasn't been painted in 20 years, 30 years, you might want to consider painting it, because that's going to go a lot towards curb appeal. Landscaping, I know I've mentioned it several times. It is far more important than you think it is. You want to take very good care of the landscaping. That's not just mowing the lawn. It's also trimming the bushes and all that other kind of stuff. And then give some thought to some new features like smart locks or smart thermostats, especially in A-class properties, those peak rentals, those are starting to become almost expected of tenants in certain markets. It's not as big of a deal in the Atlanta suburbs, but if you start to get inside the perimeter on nicer properties, people can start to expect that kind of stuff. So give that some consideration if you're refurbing your house. And then think about doing preemptive repairs. Don't wait until the tenant's in the house. If you know that the water heater is 15 years old and it's been having issues, just go ahead and replace it now, because it's going to be a much bigger deal to replace it once the tenant's moved in and it's ruptured and it's ruined all their clothes and now they're mad. It just makes more sense to get that done. If you know this is coming up, do it when the property is vacant. Don't wait for it. So, always think about those kind of things. And the last thing I'll cover is tenant responsibilities. So Zach kind of touched on this earlier, that there's some things you can bill back to the tenant. So, what is the tenant actually responsible for? We've covered everything that we're responsible for. What about the tenant? Well, they have to keep the property basically in the condition it was in on move-in. The only exception to that is what they call normal wear and tear. In the state of Georgia, there is no definition in the law of what normal wear and tear is. So it's basically up to whatever a judge thinks it is. So it's better to kind of err on the safe side on this, but still try to be a little bit aggressive with it. Expect the tenant and put that expectation on them that they're expected to keep this property basically in the condition it was when you hand it over to them. But if there's minor scuffs on the walls, that kind of stuff, you kind of have to let that go. You can't charge the tenant just because there's a little scuff on the wall from their couch. So keep that in mind. But the tenant does need to change the light bulbs on their own. They do need to change the HVAC filters. They need to maintain the landscaping after they move in. They are responsible for pest control. So in Georgia, landlords are responsible for rodent and termite control, but everything else is a tenant responsibility. So they have to take care of just that general pest control. And then any sort of basic troubleshooting. So the thermostat batteries die. They need to replace those batteries. They need to reset their own jammed garbage disposal. Those sorts of things tenants are expected to do. But for the most part, any actual repairs are a landlord responsibility. And then that last item is kind of what Zach mentioned earlier. If the tenant breaks it, that's their responsibility. So, there is no requirement for a landlord, even under the warranty of repair. If the tenant breaks it, they have to pay for the repair. Now, you might send the vendor to fix it. You can send the vendor. Let's say the tenant backs into the garage door. They put a huge dent in the garage door. You can send out a vendor to replace that garage door rather than having the tenant do it, but you can still bill that back to them. So it's still ultimately their responsibility. And we're running out of time here, so I'm going to go through this real quick. But getting work done, how you should do this, never, ever, ever, under any circumstances, do your own repair work while you've got a tenant living in the house. It's a huge liability risk. They can claim you stole something from them. If you trip and fall and break something that they have, they're going to say you have to fix it. Just vendors have insurance and you don't. Your homeowner's insurance isn't going to cover you going into the house and then the tenant claiming that you stole their $5,000 in jewelry. That just ain't going to be covered. So just stay away from it. Hire people to do it. And make sure that the people you hire are fully insured. And if it's work that requires a license, make sure that they have that kind of license. And then, like I mentioned earlier, don't waste time on multiple quotes. Find a reputable vendor that's got good reviews or a vendor that you've used in the past. Trust them to do the work. Don't waste everyone's time and frustration on sending out 5 people to give you quotes. It never makes sense. It always angers the tenant. Don't do that. And then only use insurance claims when it's absolutely necessary. If a repair is going to cost you $3,000 and your deductible is $2,500, it ain't worth saving the $500 to use the insurance claim, because it's just going to make the tenant angry that it took that long, because insurance claims take forever. So just go ahead and eat the $500. If it's a roof replacement, different story. That's going to cost you $20,000. Use the insurance claim. Do what you got to do. But if it's close, if it's on that borderline, don't risk it. So we are out of time. We're actually ran a few minutes late. I appreciate everybody joining our webinar this week, or excuse me, this quarter. We will have another webinar 3 months from now. So our next one will be in June. We'll send out information on that in an email. And of course, like I mentioned earlier, make sure you're on our email list, because not only will we send out this recording to you, we'll get all that new information to you on upcoming webinars. And just make sure you take these repairs seriously. Don't take it lightly. It's an important thing. That's the big message you should take from this. Set aside money for it. Make sure it gets done. And don't trip over dollars to save pennies. Those would be the last things I would say. So thank you, everybody, for joining our call today. Thank you to Zach. Thank you for Mario, our marketing manager. And always thank you to our clients. We will see you guys in June for our next webinar.